Welcome to Lot 76 Cars. My name's Simon and today I'm absolutely delighted to be driving the Mitsubishi Galant 2 litre GLSi Coupe. So firstly, many thanks to Philip for lending me this superb 1990 example, which has already earned its place in the Festival of the Unexceptional Concours de l'Ordinaire last year, and justifiably so, as you'll see soon. So back in the 1970s, the SMMT, the body that represents the motor industry in the UK, established a so-called gentleman's agreement to limit the number of Japanese-built imported cars into the UK to avoid flooding the UK market and to protect UK manufacturers at that time, British Leyland, Vauxhall and so on and so forth. Now, this restriction actually limited Japanese manufacturers to just 7% of UK registrations annually. And in fact, it was only removed in the year 2000. Now, consequently, Mitsubishi was a relatively niche brand right the way through. And in fact, in 1990, the date of this car's registration, they registered just under 13,000 cars. Now, putting that in context, Vauxhall sold something like 138,000 Cavaliers, so they were really restricted. However, by 1988, Mitsubishi was starting to sell this 6th generation so-called E33 car, actually in the UK, as the 1987 Japanese Car of the Year, and also with a reputation built on a toughness from its rallying exploits. It was well placed, but unfortunately sales were held back by import limitations. Consequently, it's a rare car today. In fact, there are just 250 Mitsubishi Galants of all model years left. Just 6 from 1990 and only 1 in Windsor Red. Yes, this one. We've got a proper unicorn here today. So back in August 1990, when this car was registered, the Mitsubishi Galant 2000 GLSi Coupe, to give its full model name, would have cost you £13,574, plus £740 for the automatic and £150 for this beautiful Windsor Red metallic paint on this car. Priced at a similar level to a Cavalier SRI and just under the price of a Sierra Gear, it wasn't a cheap alternative, but did offer a 3-year warranty and was incredibly well equipped. So to give you some ideas, standard equipment was very generous for the day. It has got anti-lock brakes, alloy wheels, seat height and lumbar adjustment, a remote boot, a remote petrol flap release, electric aerial, tinted glass. It's even got cruise control and actually an electric sunroof. In fact, the only things you could actually put on it were metallic paint and automatic that this car's fitted with. So design is always a subjective matter, but even if the coupe description is slightly odd for what is a 5-door car, you might feel like me that in actual fact it's actually a handsome car, and I think it is, in my opinion, more so than the sedan. The roofline is actually lower by about 2.5 centimetres or 1 inch than saloon, and it does show when you look at them side by side. From the rear view, the tailgate actually tapers very well into the back of the car to give almost a single, quite convex glass look about it. The rear reflector runs neatly into the rear lights, possibly making the car look a little bit wider than it actually is. In reality, it is only the same length as a Ford Sierra, and strikingly, it's actually 32mm narrower, and you wouldn't certainly assume that from looking at it first off. The body colour side mouldings actually stretch the full length of the car and give the car a really quality look, but combined with the chin spoiler, which is actually quite pronounced, I think, it does look a cut above a lot of the competition when they were only just about to move to body coloured mouldings. Now, the engine is the famous 4G63 fuel injected 1997cc. It's a 4-cylinder, but only in this incarnation 2 valves per cylinder. It produced a class competitive 111 brake horsepower, slightly less than Ford and Vauxhall equivalents with around 115, and there was also a smaller 1.8 unit. But if you wanted 4 valves per cylinder power, with something like 147 brake horsepower, you could actually trade up to the four-wheel drive, four-wheel steer, and I think also air suspension GTI, which will be certainly a significant upgrade on this car. The one thing we will find out hopefully a bit later is what that engine's like, because it's fitted with balancer shafts, so I think in the case of Mitsubishi they call it silent shafts, so we'll be listening out for that to see what difference it makes to the car. Now, in terms of range, that's a subject that's on many people's lips these days, but for different reasons, isn't it? But this 13.2 gallon tank, or about 60 litres, it offers around 450 miles of range. Now, that is when measured as a manual, so about 34 miles per gallon. In an automatic, I would imagine it's a little bit thirstier than that. So the instrumentation is delightfully clear, in actual fact. It's very simple. You've got a trip A and a trip B, and pretty much an array of warning lights, temperature gauge and things like that, but that's about it. So it's simple, really clearly laid out, and the size of both the speedo and the rev counter is pretty big by today's standard. I'm quite surprised, to be honest with you. Now, the steering we'll touch on a little bit later when we drive the car in another part of the video, but in actual fact it's super light. In this version it is the electronic power assisted steering rather than hydraulic. Now, in terms of living with the car day to day, the boot is not of a bad size in actual fact, and we'll cut in some pictures of that, but it does have some intrusion into the luggage space because of the rear wheel arches. Now, in actual fact, this car, as I'll say probably more than once in this video, is in superb condition, and you'll see that even the full-size spare wheel looks relatively untouched. So how does it drive, I hear you cry? Well, let's find out, shall we? So in terms of performance, well, we're not going to get the chance today to test out the top speed of 112, which is sufficient, I guess, in the terms of Rolls-Royce. 0 to 60 in about 10.4 seconds, but actually beyond the statistics, that doesn't really adequately describe this engine. The one thing I would say about the engine, it's got a lovely hum to it. It really does move along quite nicely. Now, the balancer shafts, or silent shafts as Mitsubishi actually called them, do actually seem to work. The engine feels quite willing, even though it's only a 2-valve engine. It does produce its power I think about 5,500 RPM, and peak torque arrives about 4,500, so quite a way up the rev range. But in actual fact, the car picks up well. It moves along nicely. We're at a 50 limit at the moment, and no issues keeping up with the traffic. I guess it wouldn't be at that stage. Now, the one thing I would mention is the gearbox is a 4-speed gearbox, but it's got an overdrive. Now, cars of this era, some of them were still using an overdrive gear, and that's actually activated by a switch on the side of the gear lever, and I'll put in some pictures so you can actually see that. To be honest with you, it's a really smooth change. There is no shunt with the change at all, and I'd go so far as to say I think it's smoother than the auto gearbox in my Mercedes 190e. Now, in terms of handling, it's difficult to say with something like this because we're not really going to be putting it through its paces today, but it is relatively safe and predictable. The steering, I'd led to be believed that the steering was super light, but to tell you the truth, now I've got used to it, I'm not finding it that bad actually. There is a little bit of deadness about right on the centre, but only a small amount. Perhaps not the issue that people would have actually said. And certainly back in 1990, when I was driving a Ford Sierra 1.8 GL, unfortunately, my heads would have been turned by this particular car in terms of both specification and just how easy it is to drive. And I guess Japanese cars of that era were easy to drive. I learned to drive in a Micra K10, and maybe other people did in K10s and K11s. Now, the handling It's not up there with probably the best in class, which at that time would have been the Peugeot 405 by my reckoning. But in actual fact, it's not that far off. It is predictable. It turns in okay. The one thing that I would single out for probably mention is the ride quality, whether it's a combination of the age of this car, the fact that it runs on relatively skinny tyres with a low, a very small diameter wheel. Maybe that's it, but it does seem to soak up the bumps in the road really, really well. Now we're coming to some of these sleeping policemen in the road, and that's a real test normally of cars. Certainly some modern day cars with low profile tyres do tend to suffer with that, but quite honestly, that was it. Just dealt with it very, very easily. Now it is also worth mentioning, let's not forget this is a 34-year-old car, but in actual fact it's really, really quiet. About the loudest thing probably I'm going to pick up on camera or the mic today is the indicators. It's a very willing, not little, very willing 2-litre engine, and in actual fact we're driving around town now, and quite honestly it is extremely quiet for a vehicle of this age. I'd have no issues or qualms about using this day to day, I think. So the car has stood the test of time. The instruments are as clear as the day the car was supplied, and the column stalks very light, very easy to use in the Japanese way, and in actual fact all the script on them hasn't worn out, despite the fact this car has got something like, I think, 94,000 miles on. It's actually, you would not feel this. If you told me this car got 30 or 40,000 miles on, probably I'd believe you, to be honest with you, because it really is in such good condition. One thing that is worth a mention, and cars of this era, and this is no different, visibility out and all-round visibility is brilliant. The thickness of the A, B and C pillars is such that quite honestly everything is really clear. You can see all corners of the car. In this instance the bonnet's quite raised, so in actual fact you can see the corners of the car, and also quite easily where the back of the car is. It's quite an easy car to judge, and as I mentioned elsewhere in the video, being relatively narrow compared to the even compared to its contemporaries, it does make it easy to thread around town. Now just as we come to a roundabout, you'll feel the benefit of the four-wheel disc brakes. They really do slow the car down quite well. There's no lack of confidence when you come to actually brake in this vehicle, because it just pulls it up square and quick. So let's just pull up for a second and summarise what we've learnt with the Mitsubishi Galant and how we've enjoyed our time with it today. So in summary, that's the super rare Mitsubishi Galant 2000 GLSi Coupe, to give it its full title, and we should. It's a beautifully built left field alternative to the thousands of Sierras, Cavaliers and Montegos sold back in the period. It's a class-leading specification for the time, and combined with well-known Japanese reliability, beautifully light controls, it really has stood the test of time. I guess the only shame with this car is that there's so few of them left and so few people will have the chance to experience them. So I'd like to thank Philip once again for lending me this rare car. If you like this video, please like, share, subscribe, turn on notifications so to be informed as my next videos. And once again, as always, thanks for watching.